On my screen, it says we're broadcasting, so we must be live.
We are.
All right.
We're recording now.
Well, great. Welcome to everyone. And I want to start out by saying to our friends in Cascade Locks and in all through Hood River, we apologize. We couldn't be there with you. This was supposed to be a meeting there tonight. We regret that. It's a beautiful area, and we'd certainly like to have attended, but none of these meetings can be held in person. So we'll do that, I doubt this year, but it'll have to be next year. But my apologies. There are materials in your packets, if you want to go through it, about the Bridge of the Gods and the importance of that to our state, as well as a little bit on the interstate system as well. So I encourage you to look at that. We're going to go through just a bit of administrative things. Mandy is going to walk through a couple of slides and tips for conducting these meetings. Not that we don't know how, but before we do that, Mandy, I want to tell all of you, this is an announcement that Mandy shared with us about an hour ago, Paul and I, that she is leaving her current position with ODOT. She's going to be with ODOT working on the I-205 tolling project. You're going to manage that, is that correct?
Not the tolling project, but the
construction
improvements project. Yep, the widening.
Well, that's even better. Yeah, we like that. So this will be your last meeting, I presume?
Potentially.
Okay.
Yes. So I'm not gonna leave you all stranded. So I will be available until Ryan asks me to step aside.
Well, good for you, Mandy. Good.
Yeah, I'm going to hold you to that, but it's a great opportunity for you, Mandy. We're really excited. She's going to be a real asset to the Urban Mobility and Mega Projects group, and her history on that project is really going to be helpful as well, knowing the development, a bunch of the bike ped stuff that we're working on in concert with that. She's going to be a real asset to that program. It's a good move for her and good move for the communities and for ODOT and for the state, but rough on us.
I want to bring that up at the very beginning because I know this meeting is long, it's packed, and we may not have gotten to that, but Mandy from me, and I suspect Paul as well, there's a lot of things that go behind the scenes before we have these meetings. You've done a terrific job. You've been just wonderful, and so we'll miss you, but I know that Paul and those of you who were in Clackamas County are going to enjoy the great talents you bring to that project. Let's get the thing built. That's probably the most important thing. So I'll stop with it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to work with you all.
I'll stop with that, but then you're going to cover what you don't see on your screens yet, but slides 2, 3, and they're going to talk a little bit about protocol. So would you do that now?
Yep. So I think most of you are likely becoming experts in virtual meetings. I want to let you know that this is where ODOT is still we're not quite expert status for Zoom meetings, so give us a little grace and patience tonight, please, if it's not quite as smooth as you would hope. We think that we'll try to keep folks muted just to reduce background noise. As a committee member, though, you are able to mute and unmute yourself at any point. You also can use the raise hand icon. But if I'm not able to see that or we're not calling on you soon enough, feel free to jump in by unmuting yourself so we can know that you'd like to speak. We don't have the chat box enabled tonight, so that one is not quite accurate. And if there's video connectivity problems and you need to leave, try to just join back as soon as you can. And then if there's anybody that has joined that needs to be added to the panel, to the committee list, please raise your hand now so that we can move you over so you're able to enable your video, and we'll do that. We are recording this meeting tonight, and we do have someone that is doing closed captioning. So that's available to make the meeting more accessible. We have heard that there is a delay with Zoom and the closed captioning. So if you're watching for those, just know that they're coming, but there will be a lag time there. And then as usual, we'll have a meeting summary that's prepared and posted and reviewed at the next meeting.
Great.
All the meetings are available on the website, and we have distributed them beforehand, both to the public and to the committee.
Mandy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
No, what were you saying?
I was going to say, do you want me to hand it over to you to review the agenda?
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
Okay.
As we talked about, we rehearsed, but not real well, did we? Yeah. I skipped the introductions. The reason I did that, it's just too awkward on Zoom meetings. And there's people who are on the screen, those who are not, and then there are attendees. So just want to thank all of you for attending on this beautiful summer evening. So we appreciate that very much. We're going to skip down now to public comment. This is restricted to 2 minutes. We will be timing that. So is Mandy or Ryan, is anyone signed up or raised their hand on public testimony?
Chelsea, I don't see anybody raising their hand. Do you notice anybody?
I do not see anyone raising their hands.
Okay. We did not get any comment that was submitted in writing prior to this meeting. And so it appears right now that there isn't anybody that wants to provide public comment. I'm going to just do one more look. Okay, I don't see anybody.
All right, thank you, Mandy. And I would mention that there's an OMPOC letter. You saw it in your packet. I know I talked with Craig Dirksen. I see him earlier today about that. It's been submitted to the OTC, and they've received that. And I suspect we'll take that into consideration in their further deliberation. So I just wanted to mention that. We have in slide 6, again, this is on my schedule. You probably don't see it, but you see it now. There was a question in the last minutes. We're trying to get approval of the February minutes about the cost overruns on the Rose Quarter. And I don't recall who asked for this to be updated, but we're just updating the minutes, putting in what was intended to be said. Do you recall, Mandy, who raised the question?
I think Hal had a question and asked us to be more specific about how much the cost had changed. And so I tried to address that, Hal, with this edit shown in red here.
Yeah, thanks. I think that is much more accurate, a much more accurate reflection of the conversation that happened in February. So I did have a previous question regarding the Zoom. Will the chat box be enabled in future Zoom meetings, or is that just sort of an anomaly for this meeting?
Yeah, I think that we can have that be in future meetings. Does that tend to be helpful?
It is helpful just because it's really difficult on Zoom meetings to know when to interject or to ask questions, and so the chat allows some of those things to happen without interrupting.
Okay, unfortunately, we can't change that now. It's one of the oddities of Zoom where you can't make changes to settings midstream, but that's good feedback as we move forward. And so for now, hopefully the combination of being able to raise your hand with a little icon, and also if you do need to interject, please do.
Great, yeah, that's a good comment. That should be there. So we'll get that handled. Is there any questions then on the June meeting minutes? There's 2 sets they were talking about, the February 3rd and the June 1st. Anything on the June one? Any hands raised, Mandy, at all? I can't see from my end.
I don't see any hands raised.
All right, then it would be appropriate to have a motion to accept the February 3rd and June 1st meeting minutes.
So moved.
Okay. Was that you, Paul?
No, but I'll second it.
I think it was Bill.
Okay, Bill. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion at all? So all in favor, I guess either say aye or raise your hand or something like that. All in favor of that?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Aye.
Any opposed at all? Looks like we had unanimous consent. Thank you. This is always awkward on Zoom, especially with a big group. So we appreciate very much that. We're now going to go, and Lucinda, is she queued up at this point?
I'm here.
There she is. I see her. So I think most of you know Lucinda has been working on the I-5 and I-205 toll projects, and we have about an hour. I've told that you are all probably brimming with questions, but we've got to keep it at an hour because we've got other business we've got to do. So I will tell you in advance when we get to the hour, we're going to cut. But that doesn't mean you don't get your questions answered. Mandy and others have said, submit them, they'll answer it, they'll get back. As committee members, they'll get back to you. So with that, Lucinda, please introduce your topic.
Oh, thank you very much. Lucinda Broussard, Toll Program Director. I'm just going to provide an update on the I-5 and I-205 toll projects. I have Heather Wills with me from WSP. She's a project manager, and also Matt Delata, who does the analysis. We're gonna try to make sure that we have enough time for questions for Matt, because that's usually where they're gonna come at for now. So I'll make sure that we speed through. Next slide, please. So we're going to just do project updates, going to talk about the purpose and need and the goals and objectives. We're also going to talk about impact analysis, and then Matt on 5 is the screening results discussion. Next slide, please. And the next one after that, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, nope, you went too far. One back, please. So we've been out talking to you probably heard me sometime in this last 3 months talking about what's going on in the project, trying to keep everyone updated on what we're doing and where we're going. So we're not too far ahead of everybody, and everybody's kind of coming along with us. We've done a lot of outreach with community organizations. We also have our community, we call them SALES, our community engagement liaisons. We've done an orientation for them. They are folks who are in their communities. They get together with people, their own sphere of influence in their own language, and they bring us back comments about what's going on with the program. So we're trying to make sure that we're getting in voices that we normally don't hear from by doing it in smaller groups. We have a monthly e-newsletter. We did a news release today regarding our 45-day comment period, which starts today, and our online open house. We'll kind of go into that. I'll make sure that we hit that. We've been doing briefings all around just to make sure that we're keeping everybody informed about what's going on. And then our regional modeling group data share, which we'll talk about some more, and Matt will definitely get into what that was about. Next slide, please. Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. I think we've talked about this a few times. We convened them, they had a reception, they had a listening session, and that's what these bubbles are showing you, what the questions were. Can tolls be equitable? We have an Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee, and this kind of sets the, do you even think they can be equitable? What metrics could we use? This is just it was just a great listening session about what's going on in the world, what's going on in the community, and then what's going on with tolls and how they can be applied equitably here. Next slide. Just some of the briefings we've done since the last time we met you. Last time we came and talked, we've kind of been everywhere doing the same thing, just everybody updated. Next slide. Our regional modeling group, we did do a data share on July 2nd, where we provided all the data we used and the analysis to come up through the 5 alternatives, which Matt will be going through this evening. But we've done some workshops. We've at least done one workshop with Clackamas County Technical Diversion Committee. We're willing to come out and do more if there are questions about the data or what we did with it. Next slide. What we've heard over the last 3 years, and I've been here 6 months, so I can tell you I've heard a lot of these in the 6 months I've been here, but definitely 4, 5, and 6, can tolls be equitable? The Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee, that's definitely a question and an answer we're believing we're going to get from them. Transit, we do have a transit multimodal group about, is there enough transit, where transit is, what does it look like in the future, and how we can influence that. And then diversion in the communities. Matt will get into some more of that with the analysis, the high level analysis we've done thus far. So Matt will be sharing some of that. I think there's another question on here that we've, question number 1, where and how revenue is used is a big one. Last month I was at the Transportation Commission, and I am going back this month for an action item to ask them if for revenue that's collected on a corridor, stay on the corridor. So that is our ask this month when we go forward. And I think that that helps answer that first question that's been out there for the last 3 years.
Hey, Lucinda?
Yes, yes.
Is that a legal question or a policy question?
It's a policy question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. Today we are starting our National Environmental Policy Act, or environmental review of the alternatives that we had for I-205, and we started off with 5. So we still have those 5. We're asking for comments on those 5 alternatives we have, and Matt's going to go into those more. And we're also asking for comments on the purpose and need statement for this project for I-205. I think that Matt will get more into the, here are the 5 that we're taking in. We do have a recommendation going in, but that is not what we're taking into NEPA. We're asking, what are your thoughts? So if you, it's online now, available. It has a survey with it. So if you can take the survey, look at our online open house, give us any feedback, even now, about is there someplace else or something else we can do to reach more people. We're after that for sure during this 45-day public comment period. Next slide, please. Basically, we have the online open house with the survey. We're going to be doing 3 webinars. We have social media fact sheets. We'll be doing more presentations. We're really trying to get out there and get comments. I mean, and comments from people we normally don't hear from. So we will be posting in community newspapers. So that way we can pull in more groups that we normally don't hear from. We have, of course, an equity focus. We have the equity committee who will go back into their communities and do the same. We have our community engagement liaisons who will be doing the same thing. We are out asking for comments and literally trying to reach people any way we can at this point during COVID. Next slide, please. And you know, we ask for all those comments, and most times people wonder what we do with them. So this is trying to depict that not only are we taking your comments, but we're going to do something with them. So you'll either see changes in the design, our process, or we'll tell you what happened with those comments. So we want to make sure that we're not only taking the comments, but that we're feeding back in what we did with them. So you'll probably see that in our e-newsletter. We'll start running that there. Here are the comments we received if we just group them together, and then here are the outcomes of those comments. Next slide, please. For I-5, we're going to start the planning and environmental linkages, which is like a pre-NEPA for I-5. And it's basically asking some questions, trying to narrow down to get to the alternatives. Right now, I think there are 92 possible alternatives, and we're trying to get that down to a manageable number to go into NEPA. We're going to start this fall just asking the questions, trying to answer the questions about the endpoints, trying to answer the questions about how should tolling work. So we're going to be doing that. We'll be asking our Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee the same thing, because different demographics are on the 5 than the 205. So equity is applied throughout the toll program. And we're focusing, of course, on our underserved and underrepresented communities that normally don't come out to talk to us. During the I-205, when we're doing this 45-day comment period, I think we're going to learn a lot about how to reach people more, and then we can use it when we start in the fall for the I-5. Next slide, please. Here's our timelines. The gold. The orange circles are where we are, at least right now for I-205. That's the start right now of the NEPA. And that gold one is after the 45-day comment period. So we'd be looking for FHWA to publish what's the purpose and need and which alternatives we took into this first part of NEPA. The second one is I-5, and we're doing this preliminary, this pre-environmental review process before we go into the environmental review process proper. And as you can see, it's going to take us about a year, like next year in the winter before we get there. But that will be, that's kind of our before we get into the environmental review process with our alternatives that we're taking in. And you can see that goes out a couple of years also. Next slide. Very focused on I-205. Orange circle again is our start date. And as you can see at the bottom, that light blue color or turquoise is all of the open houses and all of the public comment that we're going to be doing or engagement. And as you can see, it runs throughout the whole, cycle. I believe Heather Wills is next. She's going to talk about the purpose and need and goals and objectives and the impacts. Heather?
Thanks, Lucinda.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So the purpose and need statement that we are asking for comment on right now is the foundation of the NEPA process in terms of how you define your range of alternatives that we are also asking for comment on right now. So it really is a concise statement of the transportation problem or the challenge that we need to be addressed. And it is a pass-fail criteria. So if an alternative is considered and it does not meet the purpose and need, then it is not carried forward and dismissed from further consideration. Next slide, please. So the goals and objectives are all of those desired outcomes for the project beyond the purpose and need. So the non-transportation, broader types of things that you really want your project to achieve, but maybe isn't going to help you with that pass-fail test for the alternatives. And so that's where the analysis really takes place, and you compare and evaluate the alternatives through the environmental analysis using the goals and objectives and performance measures that are derived from the goals and objectives. Next slide. So we went out and asked our project partners what they thought of our proposed purpose and need statement, as well as goals and objectives. And these are some of the things that we heard: that equity should be at the forefront of the project. And specifically, there was a request to put it in the purpose statement, which I'm going to talk about. Add climate change, acknowledge data for the need is based on pre-COVID conditions. So we get a lot of questions about that. And you'll probably want to ask Matt about how he's thinking about that in his analysis that he's doing. As Lucinda said, how will the toll revenue be used? And then some other things like access to healthcare and reducing localized air pollutants. So as I go through the actual revised purpose and need that went out to the public, I'll talk about how each of these were addressed. Next slide, please. So I think you guys have seen this before. The project purpose is dual objectives: to manage congestion on I-205 as well as raise revenue to fund congestion relief projects. There is a sweet spot in the toll rate. Just a reminder that we are not setting toll rates right now. The OTC, Oregon Transportation Commission, will set the toll rates after the environmental process. So we use assumptions in our modeling and in our analysis that you're able to compare apples to apples across all the alternatives with those assumptions, but not necessarily what the toll rate will be in the end. Next slide. So why isn't equity in the purpose statement? As I said, the purpose statement needs to be really specific. And right now, ODOT is still, where this project is a little bit ahead of ODOT. They're still trying to figure out what equity means. And so we don't really want to pigeonhole ODOT into a definition that's still evolving. And the goals and objectives allow various definitions of what equity could mean and allows us to apply it in a more flexible way as ODOT is continuing forward and trying to define equity within their agency. Next slide, please. So as I said in the project need statements, we did add, so everything that's in blue in the upcoming slides are things we added based on the collaboration with our project partners. Next slide, please. These are the goals and objectives. So we added quite a bit here in the goals and objectives, as well as just sort of reorder the goals and objectives to elevate the equity related ones that ODOT is committed to having as in the forefront of the project. Next slide. So that was the goals and objectives and the purpose and needs. So then what is the impact analysis that we'll be doing? Next slide. In the next steps in the environmental review process, after the 45-day comment period, as Lucinda said, we will publish the purpose and need and range of alternatives and the issues that we will be studying. And that kicks us into the draft environmental assessment. And so we'll be doing an analysis between the alternatives, and that's where it gets a lot more detailed. So Matt's going to talk about the high-level screening that was done. We did not apply all of those performance measures and goals and objectives that we'll be studying in the actual NEPA process at this high level, but we will be applying that and getting a lot more detailed under a lot of different disciplines in the environmental assessment. And so ultimately we would develop a draft environmental assessment and we'll ask for a public comment on that as well. Next slide, please. So how do we measure and how do we analyze? We develop performance measures, and so this is the measurable data that will be reported out. Sometimes it is quantitative and some of it is qualitative, and as I said, it is derived from the goals and objectives, so it's to help us understand how each alternative is performing against those goals and objectives that we've identified in the project. And then we compare the impacts and benefits. And when we find impacts, we also start identifying what the mitigation would be for those impacts. And all of that gets reported out into the environmental assessment. So looking back on Lucinda's, on the timeline that she presented for I-205, there's about a year of analysis for the alternatives that we analyze in the NEPA document prior to selecting that one preferred alternative that we would carry forward into even more analysis and mitigation discussions. Next slide. And these are just some examples. We have a memo that goes into a lot of detail about the performance measures. I think it was distributed to the group before the meeting, as well as the full purpose and need and the executive summary of the screening criteria or the screening analysis that we did for the 5 alternatives.
Heather, this is Mandy. Sorry to interrupt you. Commissioner Sabas has his hand raised. Would you take a question now?
Sure.
Well, actually, why don't you go ahead and finish up, because I want to go back to slide 8, but go ahead and finish what you're doing now.
Okay. I think this is my last slide, actually. Go to the next slide. Yep. This is where I transition to Matt.
I'm going to go back to slide 8.
Yeah. There's more.
Keep going, that's 18.
8, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
One forward.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
So I had a question on here, and I held my comments to the end so you could complete your presentation. So I'm looking down here at the 5th bullet, and the 5th bullet reads, transit service along the I-205 corridor is not robust enough to afford residents of Northwest Clackamas County another travel option as alternative to driving. So my question is, in this area in which we're actually studying the tolling, there is no transit service. So it just seems maybe the wrong message there, because even using the word robust doesn't seem to even belong in the vocabulary there, because not only is it non-existent, but it's certainly not anywhere near robust. which is our biggest issue. So is that a mistake, or is there transit service in this section that I'm not aware of?
Not a mistake. I think that that has been crafted by many people, so we can edit it.
Yeah, I think this is the huge issue for Clackamas County, and I just want everyone to know there is no transit service on I-205 in Clackamas County along there. I mean, short of the Sunnyside exit where the green line ends is the only form of transit, but that 14 miles between there and Interstate 5, Wilsonville to Alton, there is no transit. That is the rub with the Clackamas County citizens and the elected officials, both at the city level and the legislative level and the county level. We are so, even on the side roads in some of the main corridors where there's very little transit period, let alone nothing on I-205. So if you could correct that maybe and actually put it there as an issue, it ought to be there as an issue somewhere that there's just a lack of. Thank you.
Yeah, not a problem.
Okay, and then slide 19, I had a question on slide 19.
So Lucinda,
Yes.
just really quick on that bullet,
Yes.
and Commissioner Savas, we originally said that there was no transit service, and we were asked by Clackamas County staff as well as other folks. So this isn't our crafting. This is coming from folks that are at the staff level in Clackamas County and other jurisdictions that have said, well, that's not really true. We actually have some. It's just, so that's what Lucinda's saying by it's been crafted several times.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
My apologies for that. I would probably maybe argue that using the word robust in there suggests that it's robust, but just not enough. I would love to dig into that, and I'll take responsibility for that. But
well, let's get it right.
Yeah.
Let's get it right.
We'll make changes to it. Not a problem. You're welcome. So is it slide 18? Slide 18?
19.
19, sorry.
No worries. So project purpose, I was just wondering, and maybe it's not the right place, but I saw in a slide up or down of this that also there was there was a comment that one of the goals or objectives was not to increase rerouting or diversion any more than it is today. And I'm just wondering if this is the right place. Maybe this is not the right place, but speaking, because a lot of the issues currently is that the diversion that we're currently experiencing or the rerouting that we're currently experiencing due to the fact that it's a bottleneck is severe enough, and it's in some neighborhoods too severe. So how do we, I don't think it's satisfactory to maintain the certain level of diversion we currently have. It needs to be radically improved upon. So I'm just kind of concerned that that's not a project purpose.
That diversion or it's a goal and objective, right?
Well, yeah, should it be under goal or objective, or should the goal or objective that speaks to the rerouting be reworded? Because again, my point is, I'll try to make this really, really simple. I tend to make things complicated. That the level of diversion we currently experience, especially in West Lynn and parts of Oregon City, is so severe that is part of the reason we have really pushed hard for fixing that bottleneck in I-205. That's really, for us, that's one of the main goals, is to reduce that diversion. And I believe under Cole's objectives, a slide or two up or down of here, it was mentioned under goals and objectives that this work or the tolling would not make the diversion or the rerouting any worse than it is today, which is already too severe. So I was wondering if that could be reframed. And maybe not, maybe you don't need to answer that today, but maybe it's something that you could think on. I don't want to belabor it or take any more time, but I just want to mention that.
Okay.
Maybe for administrative purposes, I don't know how many more questions we'll have. I see Markley had one who kept raising his hand, and there's probably others, but
Chris Warner has a question too.
Yeah, maybe we can just take them and you don't always have to have the answer and you can get back to the,
Not a problem.
I kept saying Mandy, but Lucinda, is that fine for you to go direct?
Yep,
Okay.
that's fine. That's not a problem.
Okay. I don't know who's next, Mandy, but I see Mark, he's had his hand up a couple of times.
I would just say that I concur with the comments of Commissioner Savas regarding the fact that there's virtually no transit service on 205. So it makes it very difficult for people to use alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then Chris Warner has a question.
Yeah, thanks. So I just want to go back on this slide quickly. You say improve congestion. Why don't you say manage congestion? Because you say manage up there and then you say improve congestion. So I'm just wondering, is there a semantical difference between those two, or is that improving congestion as opposed to managing congestion?
I'll take that one. It's semantics, and we can make that change.
Yeah, because we think of tolling as kind of a management tool as opposed to. So I just wanted to ask about that.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Mandy, are there others?
I don't see any others right now.
I see Smiley. She's got her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I actually had a question about I think it was the performance measure slide, but the last one that Heather Wills presented. And there, environmental justice is mentioned there. And to me, it's a statement. It doesn't necessarily, right, just back one, yes, there.
Yeah.
It's a statement. It doesn't necessarily indicate how that will be measured. And so I don't know if there's more information that you can share that helps us understand the actual measurement and the methodology behind it. And that can be shared later, certainly.
Okay.
And the answer is yes, we do. We have, there's a whole methodology memo that is being prepared that identifies exactly how we're going to do it.
You can forward that on?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Then Councillor Bergson had his hand raised.
You're muted, Craig. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I'm sorry. Are we in the comments? I was waiting for the presentation to be over. Is the presentation over?
It is not.
No, we got one more
section. I was trying to be polite and wait until the presentation was over, but I do have some comments, but I'm happy to wait until the presentation is over.
That would be great. We've got Matt, and if everybody could hold, we can get through that, and then we can come back. So thank you, Craig. So I guess Lucinda, Matt's next.
Yes.
Okay.
Matt?
Sure. Hey, I'm Matt Delata. I'm a transportation engineer and the consultant team alternatives analysis lead for the project. So I'm going to walk through the screening alternatives analysis results we have available. Next slide, please. Okay, so just an overview on where we're at with our alternative analysis. So the value pricing feasibility analysis was the regional study we did a couple of years back. And so we had one alternative there that was specific to I-205. And that was concept E, which got identified in the value pricing feasibility analysis as being able to manage traffic and generate revenue on I-205. So going back out from that alternative, that concept E, which is a single point toll on the Abernathy Bridge, we've developed 5 alternatives. We're really looking to identify if there's a better alternative than that kind of point toll on the Abernathy Bridge. Can we do better? We're really at this stage leaning on the Metro Regional Travel Demand Model, kind of a proven tool in this region, and looking at the year 2027 and comparing these alternatives against each other to see if we can get better outcomes. In the next phase of the analysis, the environmental review, we go into a lot more detail, like Heather said, and identified all those different performance measures and all those different disciplines. We're looking to take the 2 or 3 best of these 5 alternatives for that detailed level of analysis study. That's where we really get into what are the impacts of these alternatives? Are there mitigations needed? When we talk about diversion, are they, how are they affecting the region, the local system? We're looking at existing conditions, we're looking at 2040, and we're using more refined tools. So just really diving into the details versus that higher level analysis where we're at right now. Obviously, eventually we want to get to a preferred alternative, and at that stage we'd be refining that and identifying whatever impacts and mitigations are needed for the project. Next slide, please. I'm going to run through the 5 alternatives right now. So the first one is concept E from the value pricing feasibility analysis. Easy to understand. It's just a toll on the bridge. You see that little orange area that reflects the segment of I-205 that would get tolled, and then the little blue symbol, that's where a gantry could potentially be located. The virtue of this is it's pretty easy to understand, just a toll at one spot, but you can't really manage traffic as well with just a single toll at one location. Next slide, please. Our second alternative is really a variation of alternative 1. So we place gantries on either side of the bridge to capture any potential traffic that might be looking to get off of I-205 and then get right back on after the toll. So that sort of through trip rerouting kind of through Oregon. Next slide, please. Our third alternative kind of takes that concept and splits the toll between 2 different bridges, one over the Willamette River, the Abernathy Bridge, and one over the Tualatin River. So basically you take the toll, split it in half, and break it out. Our next slide, please. Our fourth alternative advances that concept. So instead of breaking the toll over 2 different segments, you're breaking it out over 4 segments. This gives us the maximum flexibility in terms of managing traffic and operations in the long term, in terms of how things change. It also would allow local users to pay essentially a lower toll. So if you're getting on in the middle at the Oregon 43 or off the Arch Bridge, you'd be paying half the toll compared to what a through trip would pay as they go along. Next slide, please. This also, alternative 5 also has tolling between Stafford Road and the Oregon 213 interchange. But this is a single zone toll. So you pay the same amount regardless of whether you're traveling on one segment of I-205 within the toll area or the whole thing. So, single one toll rate for all users, and the toll would be applied at each entry point, whether that was on the main line or one of the on-ramps. Next slide, please. So at this point, we're evaluating these screening alternatives essentially with a subset of the performance measures that Heather walked through. So the ones we're using now, broad categories are transportation system demand. So we're looking at the vehicle miles traveled, the VMT on the system, the vehicle hours traveled on the system, and we're looking at that both for freeways and non-freeway travel. We're also looking at the vehicle throughput on I-205. So that question about diversion, how much do we keep on I-205 versus how much diverts off. We also look at the effect of those diversions at a higher level. We look at what kind of mode shift you might get to transit, high occupancy vehicles or rideshare, active transportation, all the modes. That's something that the regional model can do, and we're leveraging that ability. We're also looking at volume on the local system, non-tolled. What kind of rerouting is there due to tolling? How do the traffic patterns change, and are there increases off of the freeway? Cost and revenue, we have a few different categories there, but the important, probably the most important one is the net toll revenues and what kind of funding would be available for projects along the corridor. And finally, we're looking at implementation and operations. These are more qualitative categories where we're looking at how hard is this idea to implement. Single point toll is relatively easy. Having 4 different segments is more challenging. Looking at the operational flexibility, how it can scale to a future tolling system, going back to the value pricing feasibility analysis and the regional concept of congestion management on the system, and also the federal program eligibility. Next slide, please. So this is a very high level look at all these performance measures that we've identified. And again, we're trying to compare these alternatives against one another to see which of them do better. So these are all comparisons, one against the other. And what we're trying to get to here is our recommendations of which alternatives we're going to study further in the NEPA work, where we get dialed into a much higher level of analysis and analysis of those impacts. So next slide, please. Our recommendations at this point are to advance for further study alternative 3, the bridge tolls, splitting it between 2 different locations, and alternative 4, the segment tolls. We are at this stage not recommending that alternative 1 or 2, the point tolls on the bridge, be advanced, or the zone toll. So there are some refinements to be made to this as we go along into the next stage, but at this point, we think that alternative 3 is kind of superior to alternative 1. Those are both eligible under the same federal funding program. And one of the big virtues of alternative 3 is it lessens what we're seeing in alternative 1, which the point toll on the bridge, which would be a concentrated impact in Oregon City on the Arch Bridge and through downtown. We're recommending alternative 4 because it offers the greatest flexibility in terms of managing the transportation system and how it can change over the long run. It also is the most consistent with the value pricing feasibility analysis and has the greatest potential to work as a structure in an overall regional system. One of the other benefits of alternative 4 is that, as I mentioned, those local access trips, the people getting on in the middle of the corridor are paying less, while in alternative 5, the through travel is favored due to the pricing structure. Alternative 5 also creates some local impacts near those outer extents of the tolls, including a concentrated rerouting impact through the city of Gladstone. So while alternative 5 kind of has a wider geography, it doesn't see any concentrated rerouting impact in any specific location the way that you're seeing in alternative 1 or alternative 5. Next slide. I think that's it from me.
Great, thank you, Matt. So are we going to go through somebody's really got a mic on that's reverberating. So anyway, we're going to go through questions. Mandy, do you mind being the administrator? Again, I can't see the hands up.
Sure thing. So the order that Zoom is telling me is Craig Dirksen, then Bill Avison, and then Hal Hagedorn. And if others have questions, feel free to click on your hand as well.
All right, thank you. Hey, I appreciate the work that ODOT staff is doing, barnstorming all the different stakeholder groups to give regular updates on the project and to solicit feedback. Ms. Broussard, I took the survey today, so.
Thank you.
But I noticed in the presentation that there are some previous comments that Metro and some other local government colleagues have expressed that are not reflected in the slides where it says what we have heard since the last update. And I know that I personally have been beating the drum that we need to consider I-205 and I-5 together to understand the true impact that tolling these facilities will have. And that I'm of the opinion that the current study will produce unreliable results that will be difficult to interpret. And speaking for my council, while I also appreciate that you have addressed the limited purpose and need statement, particularly comment about why equity isn't included there, we as a council don't necessarily agree with that. We would like to see equity as explicitly in the purpose and need statement. And we also believe that demand management as an issue should be explicitly mentioned in the purpose and need statement, should not only be in the goals section. I know Mr. Warner talked about, well, what does manage congestion mean? And I wondered if that phrase, manage congestion, was an attempt to lump demand management and address congestion in one statement. But I think that softens both of those. And we really strongly believe that demand management should specifically be mentioned in the purpose and need. So I think we would like to see those changes.
Thank you. I don't think she's going to respond. She'll just take that into consideration and get back. So Mandy, who's next?
Bill?
Thank you. I think the presentation was very complete. The 5 alternatives are substantial, somewhat confusing as far as a layperson, but I think you've narrowed it down to 2. I guess looking at it from a business perspective, I look at 1 or 2 alternatives. The alternative is you toll the freeway, and you improve infrastructure. If you don't improve infrastructure, then it's going to be very difficult to toll. And I think politically it's going to be dangerous. Now, I don't know if anyone's saying that that's happening, but I'd sure would like to know this evening if there is a mechanism to toll and not build out, because that is something that I just don't think will work. I think Paul has pointed out that you can't divert traffic anywhere around this system, particularly through Oregon City. You can't even get across the old bridge on a very light day, let alone having tolling and having people trying to divert off on these side streets. But we understand there's probably some other revenue streams that need to take place to get this project done. But I guess my question is to the team, will tolling take place and will there be no build out at some point? Because those discussions have come up on I-5. I guess you can toll on I-5 and not complete any lane expansions. So that's my first question. I have actually a follow-up point. I think it would be very helpful if the material in the slides included how important 205 is to connect PDX to the state. It's probably the critical transportation. It's so difficult, as everyone knows, to get through Portland and onto 84, and businesses have to get people back and forth to the airport in a timely manner. And so that's something maybe I missed it, but I think that would be helpful if that was in the slide material. And I think that's it. Thank you. Good job, Heather, Lucinda, and Matt. Appreciate it.
Great. Okay, Hal, I think you're next.
Okay, so can you go back to slide 34 on performance measures? I think you went through those fairly quickly, but I believe Heather and others have touched on the concern or centering equity as a huge part of this project. So I'm wondering where equity shows up as far as how are you going to measure your equity goals with the performance in the performance measures. I'm not seeing it anywhere in here. Does that question make sense?
It does.
Equity is important. How is it being measured, and how do you know you're achieving some of those equity goals and adjusting some of those concerns?
And we do have the methodology that we are actually working on now, and FHWA will look at, so we will provide that.
So that these aren't loose ends. What would seem to be appropriate is anybody who asked a question back to us, the committee, is there a way you might recap those plus answers? I know it's really hard. The county staff is in a terrible position trying to answer questions that they weren't anticipating or weren't really prepared. So can you do that? I mean, these are great questions.
Yep.
Okay.
We have all the questions, and we'll make sure that we provide the information to the questions we've received.
Okay.
Any other questions?
See any other hands? I don't see any other hands that are raised.
Mandy, can you hear
yes.
me?
Yes. Great.
I guess I don't know how to raise my hand. I just raised my hand, but sorry. I don't know much about tolling, but Port of Cascade Locks has been doing it for 64 years, or since 1964. And a couple of things I wanted to give out to you guys just as advice. One of them just got brought up by the member. You want to make sure that the funds that are coming out of this tolling goes down to the last team member, before the money split, to do work or anything else, so that you get your budgets correct. Because a lot of people are going to work on these projects, and it doesn't matter if it's a person figuring out what the payroll is or, some administrative person. So you need to know what those are. And I got a question. You guys are thinking about some federal funds, it sounds like. How do you guys fit into Title 23? Which says if you have tolls, you have to be able to, in order to get federal funds, you have to spend all those tolls on the toll facilities. We just got the Port of Cascade Locks just did a major lift on getting a waiver and the transportation infrastructure to pass the House, and it was a heavy lift. So I just kind of wonder if anybody knows about that and how you're going to work that.
And you'll put that on the list and get back to Jess as well. That's a great question.
I have that on the list also, yes.
Anybody else have a question?
I do, Matt, and this one's for you. Just put it on the list and get back. I unlike Jess, who has all that experience with tolling, I have none as well. But literally, Jess, I know you've got a lot. It seems to me as a layperson, the more tolling booths that you put in, the more congestion you create. I mean, if you had one every block, I mean, people would be stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. So for the lay person who doesn't understand, in some of your scenarios, you have these spots. It seems to me that it would aggravate the situation. It's not trying to get people through. You're stopping them and they're paying a toll, or they're presenting something so that they said, I've already paid it. So would you, in the questions and answers, would you kind of address that? I've been very curious how that all works.
Yeah, we'll take care of that one too.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And we have a hand now from Philip Wu.
Yes, hi, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment in response to Hal's question about the equity measures, and just to say that the Equity Mobility Advisory Committee, which I also happen to sit on, at our last meeting on July 28th, had a really robust discussion around the equity framework, which has a significant section that's looking at both process and outcome equity measures. So I think, I mean, there's a lot of discussion going on around that, and a lot of that discussion is happening at EMAC, and I think we'll hear more about the actual specifics as time goes by.
Thank you, Phil, for serving on that committee, by the way. That's great.
Okay, we have one that's come in from Brian Hodson.
Thanks. Sorry about the last minute question. Is there a way that we can get some information regarding what are the different equity pieces that are being looked at for these particular projects in the tolling project, both from a just from a people equity standpoint as well as a mobility equity aspect?
We can provide that, and that's going to be developed a lot through the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee. They're not just looking at income, they're also looking at mobility. So it's going to come through that committee. So we can continue to update you on where we are with that. Does that work?
Perfect. That would be great.
Okay, okay.
Hal, you have one more. Hal has one more.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that, you know, in the screening alternatives, it is pretty important to consider the equity aspects in the evaluation criteria up front. And I don't know what that looks like, because if you omit that from the screening of alternatives and you end up with a solution, it might end up being not very equitable in the end, if that makes sense. So I don't know what evaluation criteria relates back to the equity question, but I think it's important to consider it at the front end.
I agree.
Commissioner Savas, you're next.
You're on mute, Paul.
My question is to Matt. On that one slide, Matt, you mentioned, I think it's section 129, which is I believe that's the conventional tolling for capacity improvements, if I understand, if I recall correctly. And then the following bullet mentioned, or Lucinda mentioned, or Heather mentioned, or maybe it was yourself, that the other alternative would be to do the value pricing or congestion pricing. Is that section 160 versus 129?
I'm not exactly sure what the section number is for the value pricing pilot program. I know Oregon has one of the, I believe it's 6 states that have a slot in that in the VPPP.
Okay, I think if we're to mention section 129, maybe we should mention 160, because what my concern is already, just listening to this presentation and the questions and comments, and also listening to this presentation and other settings, it's like we're conflating the two together, and they are completely different, and the impacts are completely different. Not completely, but significantly different. And I just think it'd be helpful to at least differentiate that somehow, because it's really not clear in the presentation that there's 2 different approaches, and really the 2 different approaches are for 2 different reasons. Essentially, one's to build or generate revenue to build the project, and the other one is simply for managing congestion or reducing congestion or whatever it may be. The transit issue or the lack of transit issue applies to either of them, so that's a common denominator as far as issues. But one's ongoing. But when the comment regarding, was it Title 23? I think that was raised on the bridge tolling. Is that exclusively on section 129 or 160? Because my concern is that it seems to me that if there was a genuine effort to provide transit as a mitigating element of section 160, that would qualify, and the funds would not be solely purposed for just operational and assets and administration of the tolling only, and not for any capacity or mitigation.
Again, Paul, can we get you that answer?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else that has a question for Lucinda and her team?
Yeah, real quick.
Chris Warner does. Oh, and then, okay, Bill. Bill first and then Chris.
Well, just real quick, there was a comment that OTC will set the toll rates. Do you have any clue on how that works? Or again, I guess that my concern is the revenue stream is not going to be sufficient for build out. And so how does it work with OTC? They have enough flexibility to make it work anyway? That's
great. Chris Warner.
Yep. Thank you. Last point. Just so we're clear as we're talking about, it would be very helpful if we're talking about managing demand as opposed to managing congestion, and whether it's section 129 or 160 or whatever it is. I think that if we clearly articulate what we are trying to do in terms of our purpose and need, I think that would be very helpful from our point of view.
Great, thank you, Chris.
Any other questions?
Seeing none, Lucinda, I want to thank you and the group for presenting tonight, and hopefully you can get that information out to everybody. I'll get to Chris in a second, and if you get that out to everybody with answers, and we'll bring hopefully Mandy just back at our next meeting in October, at least some information.
Not a problem. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
I see Chris raising his hand. Was that?
Oh no, that was Jazz hands. That was thanking you in Zoom talk. So
I don't speak Portlandese, but I appreciate the interpreter.
Thank you. We'll be back with an update, and we will send over all your answers to your questions. Thank you again for your time. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
At this time, I want to introduce, if you don't already know, Ryan Windcheimer. He's he's going to give us a little update on things in the region.
I will, and just before I dive into that, I just want to say that was really useful feedback. Thank you to everybody who's for contributing to that. And I know Lucinda and her team are particularly focused on listening to what the ACT has to say and taking back those ideas to the OTC and making sure they're getting heard, as well as being responsive. So thanks to all of you for those great questions and really that important feedback that they need to hear about how to make this tolling project successful. So thank you. I actually am going to move through this pretty fast as well. I only had 5 minutes on the agenda, but I'll take just a couple extra minutes and tell you a few things that are happening that you may want to be aware of. The first one that's really top of mind for us here at ODOT is the Interstate Bridge Trending Replacement Project. I'm sure you've heard of it. We've been doing outreach on this thing for over 2 years now, but we need to close the northbound structure for about 9 days, and we're going to be doing that coming up here pretty quick. So the first thing to know is that the work is going to start this month. It's starting here this month in August, and things are going to start happening. There'll be some bridge lifts and some other things that happen as they really test and try to work through and get set up for the work that needs to happen. The major impact is, of course, this closure of the northbound span of the interstate bridge. That's going to be happening on September 12th through September 20th. So that's going to be the most severe impact. During that closure, let's see, both directions of the interstate are going to share the 3 lanes on the southbound bridge. We expect there's going to be heavy congestion, even with a dip in sort of our traffic numbers that we're seeing currently under COVID. We're starting to see those numbers come back, and so it's really hard to predict exactly what that's going to look like come September. But if the volumes were at normal levels, we'd expect to see the lengths of backups up to 4 miles, and the region could experience up to 16 hours of congestion per day. And that is even using our zipper barrier, which is allowing us to do sort of 2 lanes in the southbound for the morning and 2 lanes northbound in the afternoon, with that 1 lane being used for the opposing traffic. So it's going to be busy. In addition to the northbound span closure, we're also doing a single lane closure September 21st through September 27th in the southbound direction in order to do some work that needs to happen on that southbound structure as well. So we're asking folks to please help us by spreading the word, reducing the number of trips you're taking, delaying and shifting trips. Of course, lots of folks like me and a number of you I see on the screens are all working from home. That's extremely helpful. And just be mindful during those time periods, particularly those last couple weeks of September, that work is going to be happening. And you're going to see quite a bit more outreach continuing to happen. Mailers are going out to, I guess, 25,000 mailboxes, emails. We have done over 40 community presentations and more coming up. But that's just going to be a big impact, and so I just want to make sure you're all aware of it, and if you could please help us spread the word. We have some good news in that our I-5 variable speed signs that have been going up over the last few months are getting ready to be turned on before the end of this month, which means we can start using them to help manage traffic and help create awareness on I-5 using those signs to try to help traffic and manage that the best we can. And in addition, we're doing a bus on shoulder pilot project with C-Tran that's going to be supplementing some work that they're already doing on SR 14 and I-5. It's going to be allowing bus on shoulder on I-205. We're going to be implementing a 1-year pilot across the bridge there, and we're already working on our outreach and coordination and sharing information. There's more information on the C-Tran website about that, but it's exciting that we're seeing that here in Oregon. It's the first time we're implementing that here and trying it out on that I-205 structure. We're going to be trying that for a year. And we also are working with TriMet and SMART on 2 additional bus on shoulder pilots, one just south of the Nyberg Road interchange there on I-5 down into Wilsonville, that is about a year away, or a year and a half away, And then we're also working with Tribe on a few. So those are just a couple of the things happening that we're hopefully going to help in managing that trending replacement congestion that you're going to be seeing. Also good news for those of you who've been back and forth on 26, the LED project where we've been replacing the tunnel lights on the Vista Ridge Tunnel, that's going to be completed hopefully the end of this week. And if you've been through there, you'll see it's a substantial improvement over the old lights that we've had there, not to mention better for the environment and saving money over the long run. As Commissioner Rogers mentioned, the Hood River Bridge project, as well as what's going on at Cascade Locks, but the Hood River Bridge project, we've included a fact sheet that is in your information meeting packet, and if you don't have it there, or see it there, it's on the website, on the Region 1 Act website. There's an information sheet on how that project is going, on the EIS for that project, as well as contact information for the folks who are working on that, should you have additional questions on that. I guess those are my key updates.
Thank you, Ryan, very much. Appreciate it. Now we're going to go back to Mandy.
Hi, I just wanted to take a few minutes to discuss the draft work plan. We ran out of time at your last meeting to approve it. I didn't receive comments about the content of this work plan in between the last meeting and this one. I did receive some comments from Councilor Dirksen requesting coordination with JPAC and Metro on many of the items that would be of interest to those bodies as well. So we appreciated that input, and I wanted to get a sense of the group and whether this was a good work plan for us to use as a guide moving forward, knowing of course that we can be flexible, and if new topics come up, they can be added. As a reminder, this was based on the Transportation Commission's expected work plan, as well as topics of interest that we had heard over the past months from many of you. So if there was input and you just didn't have a chance to submit it, you can feel free to share it now. Otherwise, I would just ask to see if we could have general approval of this item.
Are you looking for a motion to approve, Mandy?
I don't know if we need an official
just a thumbs
motion,
up?
just kind of, yeah, thumbs up. And I do see that Councilor Dirksen has his hand raised.
Okay. Craig, yeah.
If I may, I just wanted to share that specifically the things that I was requesting coordination with JPAC would be on the 2024-2027 STIP, the OTC investment strategy, and the Oregon Highway Plan. And then also specifically, it seems pertinent to have the STIP, the 24-27 STIP, return here to Region 1 Act in October, and even more importantly in December after the election, as the proposals for the funding levels for the different funding categories in the STIP will be deliberated and decided on by the OTC around that time frame.
Yes, thank you. I think that we will have frequent updates as we hear more from the OTC over the next few months.
But looks like you have a thumbs up, Mandy. I didn't hear anybody objecting.
Okay, great. And please just, if you have ideas for things to be added at any point, please send them in. And this is what we'll use as a general guide moving forward then.
All right, well, thank you so much for bringing that topic. Next, we're gonna go to the OTC investment strategy for 24-27. I think Travis must be out there somewhere. I don't see him on screen, but he's the Assistant Director of Revenue Finance and Compliance for the state. So would you, is he there, Mandy? I can't see him on my screen.
Well, Travis, oh, he is here. Yep, he disappeared for a minute. Travis, can you hear us all? Okay.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Great. Yep, great.
And we see you. Thank you.
Ah, excellent. All right. Well, thank you for having me out tonight. When Mandy invited me to this meeting this time of night, I assumed it was for a happy hour Zoom call, but unfortunately, that's not the case. But since I know I may be getting between some of you and your happy hours, I will try to run through this relatively quickly and hopefully leave some time for any conversation or comments you might have back to go to the OTC, is we really do want to get input from our advisory committees, including all of the acts, and make sure that your comments and input are well represented throughout this whole process. So if you could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the Oregon Transportation Commission's updated investment strategy, which they approved in July as essentially a precursor or prelude to doing the work of the STIP. This really helped set their knowledge base and understanding for the needs across the transportation system. Next slide, please. The OTC's investment strategy was an update of a strategy that the Commission had put together back in 2017 as we were leading up to HB 2017. That document looked at what the need was across the transportation system and helped frame some of the discussion in the legislative conversation. This document was meant to take into account what has happened since that original investment strategy, reassessing the gap between needs and available resources, and also looking at what impacts that gap has on the system and on the economy and on our communities, all based on the new funding levels that are coming out of HB 2017. The document also looks across these various programs and lays out what are our current investment strategies for investing the resources. How do we try to make the best use of those limited, scarce resources across the transportation system in multiple modes? The real goal of this document was to help start the conversation and inform decisions that the Commission is going to be making regarding program funding allocations for the 24-27 STIP. Next slide, please. So it probably comes as no surprise to you that there were really a couple key conclusions of this investment strategy that really focused on some of the limited resources we really have. So even with the significance investments that were made in HB 2017, a historically large funding package, unfortunately, what we see is the condition and performance of the transportation system will decline over time. There just wasn't enough money provided by the legislature. There just isn't enough money across the entirety of the system. So what that means is that investment decisions by the OTC will require difficult trade-off discussions. If they want to fund one part of the system more, that will have to come at the expense of some other part of the system. Next slide, please. One of the reasons for this is that what we see going forward is that we really have reached a peak in transportation funding. When you look at our state and federal resources, even with the upcoming increases in the gas tax that are set to go into effect in HB 2017, when you account for inflation, we're actually going to see that our funding peaks next year and then begins a long, slow decline. A lot of that is because we're seeing greater fuel efficiency of vehicles, and we're just not seeing the growth in our revenue streams because they don't adjust with inflation over time. So we really do have a situation where we've got a lot of money coming in right now, but we really are at a peak that is going to see a long, slow decline over time in our highway funds coming in the door. Next slide, please. One of the key foundations of this work in the investment strategy are some of the statewide plans that have been promulgated by the OTC over the years with the Oregon Transportation Plan, the Oregon Highway Plan, and other modal plans. One of the foundations of our overall investment strategy comes in the Oregon Highway Plan, something we call the Major Improvements Hierarchy, Policy 1G1 for all of you huge transportation nerds like me, which basically lays out that Oregon is focused on as a fix-it first state. That doesn't mean we don't do other things, but at the very least, we need to make sure that we're protecting the existing system. That's our top priority. After that, we look at ways that we can improve efficiency and capacity of existing highway facilities. Things like you've done up in Region 1 with the intelligent transportation systems and operational improvements along our highways, or even auxiliary lanes. Third, we look to add capacity to the existing system. And then only fourth do we look to add new facilities to the system. So this really lays out that we are going to focus first and foremost on preservation of the system, and then look to other ways of ensuring that we can improve the system and make it work better. Next slide, please. And that is really built in throughout the entirety of this investment strategy. One of the areas that we lay out is about preservation, where we spend the bulk of our resources. It's the largest category in the 21 through 24 STIP that the commission just approved. And we really do focus our resources there. Even within the preservation category though, the limited funding we have means that we really do have to focus on a limited number of high priority corridors that carry really high volumes of freight and connect communities across the state. Because funding is not sufficient, we have to really have a triage approach across these highways, and just maintaining the status quo condition of the system requires more than doubling the current funding that we're dedicating in this area, even after those HB 2017 investments. Next slide, please. So when we look across the condition of some of our key assets, we invest over $300 million in this upcoming STIP into bridges. And yet, even at that funding level, we're only replacing an average of about 3 bridges a year. Because we have 2,700 bridges, that means that we're on a 900-year replacement cycle. And as well as we do with preserving the Aquina Bay Bridge and the other bridges, there is no way that our average bridge in Oregon is going to stand up for nearly a millennium. So as a result, we're going to see that bridges over time begin to deteriorate. More of them are going to have to be weight limited to heavy trucks, and we're just not going to be able to get to all those. In the pavement arena, we have pretty good pavement conditions compared to a lot of other states. And yet we know that we need about $100 million a year more to achieve a sustainable program that keeps conditions at their current level. As a result, we're going to see more and more poor pavements across the state, particularly on some of our district level highways, and that's going to impact travelers as they go about their business. It's also important to note that, as many of you probably know, that it's actually cheaper to keep pavement in good condition if you do those regular updates. So when we let pavements deteriorate, it actually costs us more in the long run if they deteriorate, and then we have to spend a lot of money to rehabilitate them rather than just keep them in good shape. And one of my favorite areas that we don't talk about very much, but culverts. We have a lot of really nasty old culverts on the system that look like this. That just have not been replaced in years and are really falling apart. Those culverts even beat out bridges. They're on a 1,300-year replacement cycle. And unfortunately, when a culvert blows, it can be pretty spectacular and cut off highways, close them to traffic, and cause all sorts of problems. So that's just a sense of where we are with some of our key assets. Next slide, please. Safety is another one of the key investment areas. We average over 1,800 fatal and serious injury crashes each year, and that's actually going up, particularly for vulnerable users, bicyclists and pedestrians. Those deaths are at the highest in 27 years, and that particularly impacts communities of color and low-income individuals who are more likely to be the victims of traffic crashes. We have a very robust all-roads transportation safety program that uses a data-driven approach to make strategic investments, trying to find the most cost-effective way to save lives and reduce serious injuries for all users on all public roads, whether they're state highways or local roads. We put a lot of money into this, and yet we know that there's a lot more need out there across the system where we could be saving more lives. Next slide. Active transportation is another key area. The bicycle and pedestrian network across the state is growing over time, and yet at the rate we're going, it'll take 164 years for ODOT to complete the state system of bike lanes and sidewalks along our urban state highways. We need $53 million a year to complete that basic network on state highways by 2050. As one measure of need, we recently opened up the the Safe Routes to School competitive grant program. And when we did that, we saw program applications coming in totaling 5 times the available funds, indicating that there's significant demand for investments in our communities in active transportation infrastructure, particularly to help kids get safely to and from school. Next slide, please. Public transportation is also a key need across the state, whether you're in an urban area like the Portland metro region or even in our rural areas where investments in public transportation can help people get around, get to doctor's appointments in bigger cities nearby, or even help our seniors age in place. What we found is that even though there was a massive investment in public transportation in HB 2017 with the new statewide transportation improvement fund, that funding really only got us a little bit into the need that we see out there across the system. And over time, that will flatten out. And as a result, we're going to actually fall below the service levels that we saw before we created the statewide Transportation Improvement Fund. So there's significant need out there across the state for investments in public transportation. Next slide, please. Multimodal freight is an ongoing concern. We've had the Connect Oregon program over the last about 15 years. This is one of the only sources of funding we can use for rail and marine projects that are really critical to moving goods for our trade-dependent economy. The challenge is that even though HB 2017 created a dedicated funding stream for Connect Oregon, it really did so at a fairly low level. So the dedicated funding averages about $11 million a year. That's a fraction, only about 30% of the $35 million a year that we average in Connect Oregon funding from 2006 to 2017. So really just a small amount of the need. And we don't anticipate being able to offer another competitive round of Connect Oregon funding until probably about 2 years from now, based on our current expectations of spending out on projects that are already in line. Next slide. So modernization of the highway system is also a key area, particularly in the Portland metro region, where we've seen massive growth in traffic over recent years as population grew, the economy grew, and as jobs increased. We've obviously gotten a little bit of a break thanks to COVID-19, but we do expect that as the economy bounces back and the virus hopefully eventually gets under control, we'll see that those traffic levels bounce back. So not just in Portland, but in other areas of the state, we're seeing that congestion growth. The challenge is that most of our modernization project funding comes from legislative earmarks. That's been the case in the Jobs and Transportation Act of 2009, as well as HB 2017. There's been very little discretionary money made available by the OTC in the last several rounds of STIP for modernization projects. So we really have fairly limited funding in the STIP for these types of projects. Next slide, please. So that gives you a sense of some of the need that the OTC has identified across the system that will go into their calculations as they try to balance the best ways to manage those trade-offs and fund the critical needs across the system. Let me talk to you now a little bit about the STIP development so that we can bring you fully up to speed and then begin that process of getting your input and feedback on how the OTC should make investments in this STIP. So next slide, please. So one of the key questions people always ask is, what the heck is the STIP? And it's important to remember that it's our capital program funds, federal and state funds that we put into the STIP. It doesn't include our state-funded multimodal grant programs or the money we put into maintaining or operating the system, or a lot of our other revenue program or administrative functions like the DMV, which is part of ODOT, or our Commerce and Compliance Division. So it's really a subset of the funds we have available to ODOT. But it is those funds that we invest in capital expenditures on the transportation system. Next slide, please. The STIP is a mixture of state and federal funds that we get by formula, and the money that's available, made available by the legislature. The first step in the process of developing that STIP is to allocate that funding across the different program categories. That's what the commission started in July, and we're going to be going through that process through the end of the year. Once we complete that, we allocate the funding, we develop the programs, then comes the project selection process. And that's where we'll be engaging our stakeholders and ACTS in helping us select the highest priority projects across the state. That is a process that involves going out and scoping projects and then developing cost estimates and drawing the line. We generally pick a fairly big list of potential projects, 150, 200% of available funding, and then narrow that down. The third step, which won't come until 2023, is that public review and then approval by the OTC and then the federal government as well. So we have a 3-year STIP development process. It feels like a long time, but it also goes pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So the OTC over the next several months is going to be going through this process of allocating funds. We already had a discussion with the commission last month about the funding categories. In August through November, we're going to be working with them to develop and review different funding scenarios that will look at how can we meet the goals we have across the transportation system using the available funds we have, and how do we manage those trade-offs. And then we hope by December, the commission will be able to approve those funding, that final funding scenario that they select. Next slide, please. In July, the commission decided as a starting point to start out with 6 program funding categories. These are actually the same categories that we had in the STIP for 21 through 24. So enhanced highway projects are those that expand or enhance the transportation system, generally on the state highway system. Fix-it projects maintain or fix the state highway system. Safety projects are focused on reducing fatal and serious injury crashes on Oregon's roads. Non-highway projects are those, obviously, bicycle, pedestrian, public transportation, transportation options projects across the system. And then we have a number of local programs as well. These are, there's some overlap with the non-highway programs, as a lot of local governments get money from those non-highway programs, but those are specifically dedicated to non-highway projects. Local programs are programs that give funding to local governments for priority projects. And then we have a little bit of a catch-all other functions category as well. That is the more the administrative side, planning, data collection, research, and some of those things. Next slide, please. In the last STIP, as you can see from this slide, the 21 through 24 STIP that the OTC just approved, the 2 biggest categories of funding were the enhanced highway category, where most of that money came from earmarks in HB 2017. Things like the Oregon 217 auxiliary lane project or other projects that were earmarked across the state. There was also a significant amount of money that went into the Fix-It programs, and then the rest of the money was split among the other categories of funding. So Fix-It and Enhanced Highway generally have been the largest categories, but that mix of funding differs by each STIP. Next slide, please. So throughout this process, we want to make sure that we're engaging the public and stakeholders, and particularly our advisory committee. We're going to be having these conversations with you over the course of the STIP process, coming to you and asking for your input. We're going to be sending out monthly updates on what the OTC does, what decisions they make, and how you can weigh in on that. We already have out on the street a public survey on spending priorities, and we're also likely going to be doing an online open house on the funding scenarios as we get further through this process. Throughout this, we're going to have ongoing public comment opportunities. Any of you are welcome and encouraged to draft a letter to the OTC, come speak at one of their meetings if we ever get back to in-person meetings, and just be able to provide that input. Particularly important is going to be the input from our area commissions on transportation, the other advisory committees. We really hope that you'll consider drafting a letter to the commission, sending in feedback in other ways. I should note too that because so much has gone virtual, we are going to be holding a webinar next Monday, I believe, that will lay all this out. We'll be posting that online for those of you who can't make it. And then we also have an online survey that is going just to our advisory committee members, because we recognize it may be easier for folks to be able to weigh in individually rather than just in the context of the larger group meetings. Next slide, please. One of the important changes that we're making in this STIP is based on the fact that Governor Brown has signed an executive order on climate change that directs ODOT to make sure that throughout the project selection cycle, we're applying a climate lens to our project selection. So that is going to start right now with the first stage really being the program funding allocation that we're underway with now. We're going to use that climate lens, among other factors, the other goals we've set, to help inform the development of our program funding scenarios. Then as we select projects, climate will also be one of the factors that we work in to that project selection process. And then finally, we need to, per the executive order, be able to account for the impact, the climate impacts of the projects in the draft and final STIP. Next slide, please. One of the other things that has changed in this STIP is that the Transportation Commission has been working with ODOT over the last several months to develop a strategic action plan. They have laid out at the commission level 3 strategic priorities around equity, building a modern transportation system, and ensuring sufficient and reliable funding that will factor into our STIP development process, particularly the modern transportation system. Next slide, please. In this area, the commission has laid out both a statement of what the priority means, as well as the goals that are underneath that. So you see in this area that the commission and ODOT are focused on preservation and stewardship of our multimodal transportation system, as well as safety of the system, accessibility, mobility, and climate change, congestion relief, effective project delivery, and applying innovative technologies to the transportation system. So all of these will be the goal areas that the Commission is trying to address as they allocate funding in the STIP. Next slide, please. So what we have done is framed up a number of questions that we're asking advisory committees to consider and respond back to. These are the same questions that actually are on the survey that was sent out to advisory committee members. And if you haven't received that, you should soon. So what we're asking really is for our advisory committees to weigh into the OTC for their discussion in September about what are the highest priority transportation needs for funding across the entire state, and how should the Commission allocate the funding between modes of transportation and categories of funding to meet the state's goals. That includes how we should allocate funding among fix-it, safety, and highway enhanced programs, as well as how we should target non-highway spending to address our statewide goals. And of course, given the limited nature of funding, we really want any input and insight you have on how you'd recommend that the OTC weighs those trade-offs between those various needs across the transportation system. So with that, I will stop now and happy to answer any questions or take any comments if you have the time. If not, we look forward to you weighing in other settings.
Mandy, again, are there comments?
There are. Commissioner Savas first.
Yeah, thank you, Travis, for your presentation. I was on a couple slides past. I didn't see any slide numbers. I don't know which one to reference, but talked about some of the goals in regard to the governor's action plan on climate, and they look all valid and all. But I didn't know if those were standalone to the criteria of future investments, or to all investments, or simply to the governor's climate plan. And I say that because there's two elements that weren't really mentioned that we need to think about. And one was, and I think Oregon, and especially the metro region, seems to be the anomaly when you look at other metro regions right now, is that we seem to be growing faster than a lot of other metro regions, right? We have a lot of people moving here, so growth is a huge issue. And when someone moves here, they obviously need to get themselves from here to there. And I didn't see anything in the criteria that address growth. And the other thing that's missing with that kind of goes hand in hand with growth and in the economy is really economic development. I mean, how the transportation system plans to meet both the growth and also how it plans to meet economic development in a way that provides a jobs to housing balance. And if we simply don't plan for that, I think we're setting ourselves up for a problem. I think we're already there. I think some people would argue that we already are there right now.
Yeah.
That the jobs and housing growth and balance is there. At the beginning of your presentation, you simply pointed out that there's a funding problem, and I thought maybe you were going to lead off or finish off with a means to address that, but I didn't see that. So maybe there's a plan for that. But I would like to just pose one question to you now, and maybe the other stuff you can get back to us on at a later time. But my question is that in the advent of the T2020 process, I certainly realize that the STIP process and a lot of the federal and state processes are truly very robust processes. I mean, you have a project selection process that you pointed out. There's public involvement. There's jurisdictional submissions for projects. There's a lot of things that we've come accustomed to, whether it's a JPAC or the region, that we just simply, or the R1 Act, that we simply just didn't have with the T2020 process. But I raise the T2020 process only because that there's a lot of projects and highways, state highways, that were left off or projects left out. And if you were going to end in a means to address the funding for long-term stability, I was wondering how we could either prioritize STIP projects in the future for areas if the T2020 measure passes in November, how we make up for that in other areas, because we really created a disparity, frankly, between those corridors and the rest of the system that needs to work. It still needs to work and address, again, growth, economic development, transit, and all those things. So sorry for so much, but I just thought I'd put it all on the table. Thank you.
Good. No, appreciate that. And, you know, I would say to your first couple comments about growth and economic development, that some of that is captured under that congestion relief goal that's under that modern transportation system priority. So we recognize that there has been growth in the metro region and other parts of the state, and that we need to be looking to ways to address that congestion that is in many ways affecting our livability and crippling our communities and crippling our economy in some cases through multimodal solutions in both the supply and demand side of that equation. So to your comment about the T2020 process, you know, obviously the commission is starting this process now, but I think Councillor Dirksen noted that we won't complete this until after the election. So the commission has an opportunity to take into account what action the metro region takes on that major investment plan that is being put together. So there are times where the commission takes the action of you know, the legislature in the case of HB 2017, or the metro region in the case of T2020, and then looks at what needs have been addressed through those investments, and then looks to balance some of that. So that would be, you know, one of the areas where the region could weigh in, the act could weigh in, is how the commission should consider investments in the metro region, given what will be funded in T2020 if it passes versus what won't be funded. So we would certainly welcome and encourage some thinking about how that will work, and in particular, you know, what investment priorities the commission should have if the package should pass.
Andy, just a time check. We only had 15 minutes and we're over a half hour on this topic already. How many more folks have raised?
I see 4 hands that are raised right now.
Is this something that they can ask the questions, and Travis, or you can get back to us on? Because we've got some other items we really need to take care of tonight.
Okay, next would be Councillor Dirksen.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments by Commissioner Savas and also the response from Travis about Metro's funding measure that'll be on the November ballot. And so in light of that, I think we should, as the Region 1 Act, we should formally advise the OTC to be flexible in its funding policies and funding categories within the 24-27 STIP, so that we can have a policy that'll leverage those potential new revenues, and ultimately we'd be able to work in partnership to achieve shared objectives. So I would recommend that we do that in the near future. Roy mentioned earlier the letter that OMPOC submitted to the OTC with regard to the STIP, the upcoming STIP. The OMPOC letter, a reminder to people, OMPOC is the Oregon MPO Consortium, of which there are 8 MPOs around the state. So all the urban areas in the state together represent about 70% of the population of Oregon. That letter encourages the OTC to develop an involvement process that will establish equitable distribution of funds toward projects and programs of federal funds if they come in at levels above what's assumed. My understanding is the OTC has decided to go with a conservative assumption of a 10% reduction in federal funding for those fiscal years 2025 to 27. Now, they did direct staff to return to the OTC with the process for discussion at their August meeting, but it would be good to understand further from Travis and other staff what is the current thinking and process being put forward to make sure that if those funds come in higher than that reduction of 10%, what's the public process for determining then what other further projects could be using that fund? So while ODOT staff did work hard to reflect local priorities under this leverage policy direction, the funding policy direction still doesn't guarantee the opportunity for stakeholders like ourselves to raise other factors or nominate local priorities for the state system that might be different from ODOT's maintenance data catalog. So those are my thoughts with one recommended specific action.
Travis, before you comment, let's take another question. We only have about 4 minutes. We're, as I say, way over on this one. Who's next, Mandy?
Chris Warner.
Thanks. I'll be very short. Travis, in terms of the discussion of jurisdictional transfers and how does that weigh in any of, and we can do this offline, and any of the OTC conversations as far as really leveraging whether it's safety or local communities? I just think that there's a real synergy there, trying to leverage jurisdictional transfers. Not only does that take that off the books for you, but it also enhances the local community. So we can talk about that offline, but I think that's something we need to talk about.
Thank you, Chris. Who's next, Mandy?
Ryan Wincheimer.
I'll be very quick. Travis, as you can tell, there's a group of folks here in the Region 1 Act that are just, chomping at the bit to really have an impact and be able to share their views. The folks who have a long history of leveraging and partnering and expertise in everything from equity to climate change and others. We're even having a conversation towards the end of this meeting that I know Commissioner Roger wants to get to. That's talking about how do we have a conversation with the OTC about a very large unmet need in some of the larger projects that we're looking at across the region. And so I think just as we prepare for our OTC workshop and our conversations between the ACTs and the OTC, just creating space for these folks to be able to have some more of that conversation. So thank you for your time today and for passing on the stuff that you've heard from our group.
Okay, Mandy, who's next?
Al Hagedorn is the last one.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for that great presentation, Travis. So in all of the presentations, one of the things that I feel like is missing from even being mentioned is the Oregon Bike Bill. And I think your slide that identifies the need of $53 million per year for active transportation, I think that's a drop in the bucket compared to all of the other spending buckets that are available out there. And so if you could provide some more information on how the Oregon Bike Bill, which is a legislative mandate that is going to turn 50 next year, how that is sort of considered in the whole STIP process, that would be really helpful to understand.
Okay. Thank you. That's it, Mandy, at this point?
That's it, yes. Yeah. And if others have questions, you can send them to me and I can get them to Travis.
And maybe Travis can respond back. I know it was short. We had 15 minutes, which was an inappropriate time. These were always inappropriate. We get too many agenda items and little time to discuss them, but maybe you can write a few Scrivener notes and get them out to the group. But thank you so much.
Happy to.
Maybe we'll see you again soon.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next item is a letter that's being proposed. Brian Hudson Mayor Canby, would you want to introduce that one?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. So I'd like what is in front of you on the screen and in the packet for this evening's meeting is a letter to send on from the ACT to the OTC to support more funding or funding to take care of funding the major projects that we talked about last month as a group. As you know, we're trying to figure out ways to get funding for projects like 217, I-5, and then I-5 at the Rose Quarter. And so I think this letter really calls on the OTC to provide some leadership in getting funding for these projects. I'm hoping that the ACT will support this letter and we can move it forward to the OTC for their meeting.
Thank you, Brian. Craig Dirksen has a couple of friendly amendments that he'd like to propose.
Thank you. Yes. Mr. Mayor, I love this letter and I love the idea of creating some sort of a stakeholder table to have this discussion. The small amendment that I would ask, particularly in light of the conversation we've had tonight, is that we include in the list of projects that should be discussed by such a stakeholder table to include some of those state-owned arterials in our region. So specifically, if you could look at if people look at the letter, in the second paragraph where it lists the projects where it says not limited to Highway 26 and the I-5 Boone Bridge, add the phrase after that, and the state-owned arterials. And then in the next paragraph down at the end where it makes that same list again, I-5 bridge, Highway 26 Boone Bridge, and then add, as well as state-owned arterials identified for investment by Metro's regional funding measure. So that would broaden the scope a little bit and make sure that those are included in the discussion by any such stakeholder table or group.
Brian, do you have some comments you want to make?
Yes. Mr. Dirksen, I appreciate those amendments to that. I think that we need to keep this letter to the points at hand. I mean, we've talked about this last month, and this has been an ongoing piece with the OTC of getting funding for these projects so that we get them done, get them started. I think if we add those arterial pieces, which to me, I think that's what STIP is for, as well as some of these other funding things that are out there to go after, I think that clouds what we're trying to get accomplished with these larger projects.
We do have comments waiting from Commissioner Savas and then Chris Warner. And then I see Jason Snyder waving his hand too.
And did I see Denny, or was that just a thumbs up?
Callaway raised his hand.
Yep, Steve as well. Okay. I think you start with Paul then.
Yeah, I concur with Mayor Hodson's comments, but I want to just build on that. I like the letter. I like the letter as crafted. I would say that being that the purpose of this is for the regional freeway system, and I think that's the emphasis. That's something that has been kind of left out or left off, and I think that's the focus of this. So those other highways that Councilor Dirksen mentioned are really not part of the freeway system. And being that all of the, as I mentioned, my other comments on the STIP comments, we got to remember that the processes of which we all follow, and I've been schooled to follow for federal and state funding, are typically met. But the T2020 didn't have to jump through those hoops. So it seems a little bit awkward to suggest that we would build and put monies in a process, or for projects for a process that didn't meet the same goals, and deny that for other areas. So I'd like to keep the emphasis on the freeway system. I think it dilutes the message to add some of the surface highways in town, as Councilor Dirksen mentioned. And I'll be so bold as to approve the letter as written. I move to approve the letter as written.
I'll second.
I'll second. There's a motion and a second now for discussion. Let's keep going. I think it was Chris next.
Okay, Chris next, then I think Jason, and then Steve Calloway.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you. I spoke to folks about this on Friday. You know, I think from the City of Portland's point of view, we don't support the letter. And I think there's a number of reasons why. Certainly, these projects were prioritized by the legislature. I think one of the things that I found sobering from Travis's conversation is in terms of where we're going as a state and as a system in terms of funding our transportation system. So one of the things we've learned from House Bill 2017, and not only from the Rose Corridor, but from all the other projects, there's not enough money to go around. And I recognize this letter says that there's not enough money to go around, but I'm concerned about what this does to the rest of the state of the transportation funding, not only for this region, but for statewide. This is a huge amount of money. I mean, we're talking like, what, almost $300 million more for the Rose Corridor project. We don't know how much more I-205 is. The letter even states that tolls aren't going to pay for it. So in order for us to support this, there has to be a more thoughtful conversation. I liked what Councilor Dirksen was talking about, but now we've added the Boone Bridge, I-5, Highway 26. From a point of view, the city can't support really what looks like designating almost all the money we have for transportation in this state, just the highway project. So we don't support the letter.
I don't remember if it was Jason next or Steve, but Jason, do you want to just jump in?
Yeah. You know, I think that, and I made this point at the last meeting, and I think others did too, and Commissioner Savas and Mayor Hodson have stated it. I think it's important that we continue to push the OTC to actually figure some of this stuff out on these bigger projects if we're talking about tolling. I heard Mr. Warner's comments and I understand them, but I feel often like we end up in these situations where we've got hundreds of millions of dollars of gap in projects, and we need to push them to figure some of this stuff out. And I support the letter. I'm a little concerned with, I mean, I understand Councillor Dirkson's points, but I worry that that sort of muddies the message. So that's what I have to share.
Thank you, Mayor. Another mayor, Mayor Callaway.
Thank you. And I know it's been moved and seconded, so the amendments are off the table. But
that's not true.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm not in favor of the amendments, partly because as we to have such a short discussion period for the letter, and that's and I know we've moved this meeting along, but I just don't feel like that's enough time, because while they may seem like minor amendments, to me it really does change the focus of the letter. And where HB 217 or 2017 focuses on statewide impacts, the district highways aren't a target for statewide priorities. And so I think that we need to stick with this letter. And I know I'm among many in Washington County who support the letter as was brought forth, and we'll be voting yes in favor of the letter, and we'll encourage others as well. And I think, Chris, and it could be I'm just not fully comprehending Portland's position, but it seems like, the stakeholder group is going to be able to address some of those funding issues, because when I brought this up last meeting, there was no acknowledgement that there wasn't going to be enough money from the tolling, and that we needed to bring people together specifically to address this. And I think that this letter absolutely does that.
Thank you. Mandy, is there others?
Markley Drake, did you have a question? Comment?
Thank you. Yes. I support the letter as written. And I know there's a lot of other issues facing us, but we need to kind of move these agendas forward. And this letter accomplishes that in this part. And I know there's other issues that we will need to be addressed in the future, but I would like to move this letter along. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Jessica Vega Peterson.
Thank you, Mandy. So, I appreciate the work that went into writing this letter. It just seems to me that the target of this letter might be off. I mean, if there are, hundreds of millions of dollars in gaps for the three major projects that were identified by the legislature through a statewide conversation on what the statewide priorities were, for the Rose Quarter, I-205 and 217, that seems to me that we want to be talking with the legislature on how to address these issues and how to address that funding gap. I mean, the OTC can perhaps, have a group that's going to be discussing this, but without reaching out to legislators and talking to them about how we truly address the dollars that are needed, I don't think that a group is going to go very far. So I just question, how directing this letter to the OTC in the first place, and then as well as, we know that there's funding gaps, and just, it seems to me that bringing up Highway 26 and the I-5 Boone Bridge are maybe not working in partnership with trying to figure out the very real funding problems that we have for the existing priorities that are in 217, and just raising issues that the legislature hadn't prioritized through their vote with that transportation package.
Thank you, Jessica. Is there, Mandy, any more?
Bill Avison.
Oh, I'm here. I'm going to lower my hand because all my questions are answered. But okay, I do support the letter. I guess am I still on?
You are.
Yes.
I will. Okay, since I have the mic, I'll make it quick. But Portland and Chris, I really support. I understand your position. I understand, Craig, your position. But you do have other funding sources for light rail and TriMet and so forth. This is really what, it's our position that we need for freeways and some alternative transportation.
I know, I'm just trying to cut down these guys so we can get a vote done.
So yeah, I'm done.
Okay, the last one was Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I just want to address some concerns. I believe Chris raised a good point, and Commissioner Jessica Vega-Peterson did as well. And I just want to assure them, I believe our intention is to not fill the gaps with STIP dollars or any other dollars, but specifically to seek funding, involve legislators, and do this in advance of the legislative session coming. So it's to find new funding, not deter or take from existing funding sources. And we would want to fully engage our legislators, again, at this particular table if it's convened, and in the legislature, again, in 2021. So that's why I support the letter. I think it would do no harm to any other funding sources we're talking about whatsoever.
Okay, we do have, is there others, Mandy?
That's all I see right now. If there's anyone else, please chime in.
I know Councilor Dirksen was saying it wasn't true that we didn't have another motion. Is there any one who's asking to amend the main motion?
Call for a vote.
Question's been called for. All in favor? This is going to be awkward because you can't see everybody. Mandy, how are we going to do this?
Well, if everyone is able to vote with your raise your hand icon, then we can count it.
I don't have that icon. I think you need to take a roll call vote.
Okay, I can do that and go down the screen. Okay, Bill Avison?
Aye.
Mark Lee Drake?
Aye.
Paul Savas?
Aye.
Roy Rogers?
Aye.
Craig Dirksen?
Aye.
John Davies?
I'll vote yes.
Chris Warner?
No.
Brian Hodson?
Aye.
Denny Doyle?
Aye.
Philip Wu?
Yes.
Pia Welch?
Aye.
I'm sorry, Pia, what was that? Aye?
Not.
Yes.
Ivo Trumer?
Yes.
Ryan?
Aye.
Sorry, the names are moving around on my list here. Just making it hard. Hal Hagedorn?
I'm going to abstain.
Jason Schneider?
Yes.
Jessica Vega-Peterson?
No.
Sumi Malik?
This is a reaching going on.
Right. Yes.
Not behind Portland.
Zach Culver?
Metro.
Kenny, you're not on mute.
He's not on mute.
Zach?
Okay.
Okay, so on this one here, I mean, I think that I'm going to have to be a no on this one.
Okay, and I feel like I might have missed somebody. Is there anybody that I have missed?
Yes. Jess Groves.
Jess Groves?
Yes.
Okay.
Teresa, go ahead. Teresa Kohlhoff, yes.
Okay. Jerry Hinton?
Aye. Steve Calloway, aye.
Mike Coates, yes.
Is there anyone else?
Mayor Shirato, I saw him earlier. Is he still on?
Let me see if I can see him.
He was earlier. Durham. He may have left. Okay.
I don't see him.
All right. He was there earlier. Is there anyone else who is either listening or online who is a participant, meaning on the committee, who hasn't voted and would like to? Do you have the count, Mandy? Were you able to tell them? All Ryan or whoever.
Vanessa or Roxanne, can you tell me the count? We're just double checking. We think there were 19 yeses.
I believe there's 19.
Okay. Well, 16's all we had to have was 16 or more. So, okay, it passes. Thank you. Two administrative things. As you know, ODOT, as well as all state committees, are not meeting in person. So our next meeting on October 5th of this year will be a Zoom meeting. I do again want to apologize to our good friends in Hood River and also you, Jess, for not being able to have a meeting in your area. We really would like to come, and it's just not, with the COVID situation, it's not allowable. And I would adjourn now in a second and say, Mandy, thank you for your great service in the event we don't get a chance to see your smiling face at the next meeting. Thank you so much for all you've done.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else?
Good luck, Mandy.
Thank you.
All right, we are adjourned then. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks.